professionals. They vanished. They sent a gang. They ended up mangled. They sent special forces. He drove to them. Now he's standing on a building, 8 names on his lips and a hostage in his hand. The police, the snipers, the helicopters, none of it matters, because the boy they tortured for years just told the entire world every single one of them will die. The protagonist believes he has only one goal: revenge. The horrific memories of his past replay constantly in his mind, fueling his desire for vengeance. Meanwhile, a skinny boy woke up from a long coma. As soon as he opened his eyes, camera flashes blinded him. A reporter heartlessly asked, "How does it feel to know your parents died on live TV?" The shock was too much. The boy suffered a massive panic attack, and doctors had to sedate him immediately. He fell back into a deep sleep, haunted by the faces of those who had ruined his life. When he finally woke up again, much more time had passed. Only his aunt was there to explain the tragedy. After a terrible incident at his school, his parents had tried to get justice. However, the families of the bullies were the most powerful and corrupt people in Korea. Using money and bribery, they buried the case, and the bullies were only ordered to give a simple apology. His parents refused to give up, but they were fighting an impossible battle. In the end, they died together in the middle of a main road. No one knew if they took their own lives in despair or if they were pushed to the limit by threats. Hearing this, the boy, the story's protagonist, sank into deep misery. His tragic story became famous across the country. As he sat in his hospital bed, a cold thirst for revenge began to grow inside him. Eventually, he moved into a lonely apartment on the top floor of a building. A new woman came to rent a unit in the same building, and the manager gave her one strict rule: never go to the top floor. It was completely off limits. She was curious, but she agreed and moved in. Up in that forbidden room, the protagonist lived a painful, isolated life. For 9 months, he stayed glued to his computer, reading every news report about his parents and the incident. He forced himself to relive the pain over and over. He discovered that someone was secretly paying his rent for him. One day, there was a knock at his door. A woman entered, the same person who had cared for him when he was sick. She was now his counselor, trying to help him rejoin society. His room was overflowing with trash because he never went outside. She told him that living like this wasn't human and tried to encourage him to go back to school or at least get some fresh air. The boy remained silent, barely listening as he scrolled through his phone. Once she left, he went back to his computer. He used his skills to hack into a private group chat belonging to his former classmates, the ones who had attacked him. He saw them laughing and living happy, carefree lives as if they hadn't destroyed a family. His rage became unbearable. Suddenly, a massive sound shook the building. It sounded like something had screamed down from the sky and crashed onto the roof. Terrified, he thought it might be a burglar. He forced himself to move toward the door, even though the trauma of his past made his chest hurt. When he opened the door and stepped out, the bright daylight blinded him. Once his eyes adjusted, he saw something impossible. A flaming sword had fallen from the sky and was stuck in the rooftop. As the flames died down, the boy, whose name is Seyoung, walked toward it. He couldn't understand where it came from or why it was there. It looked like a legendary weapon from a video game, specifically a Zweihander, a massive two-handed sword from the Renaissance. The rooftop doors were still locked, so no human could have put it there. Confused and overwhelmed, Seyoung let out a loud scream that echoed through the building. Finally, he gave up trying to make sense of the mystery, left the sword sticking out of the roof, and went back to his room to lie down. Seyoung had no idea that ignoring the situation was about to become impossible. Out of nowhere, deep sounds like beating drums began echoing from outside. The sword was making noise. He tried to ignore it, but eventually the sound became too loud. When he finally fell asleep, he had strange, vivid dreams. In the dreams, he was in the middle of a massive war, surrounded by soldiers. Far ahead, he saw a man in a red cape holding a sword that looked exactly like the one on his roof. Huge monsters were charging toward the man, but the moment he drew the blade, an enormous force exploded out, disintegrating everything in its path. The man's power was overwhelming. As the steam from the blast cleared, Seyoung saw a massive pile of dead monsters with the sword stuck at the very top. The image burned into his mind. When he woke up, he sat on his bed, wondering if it was really just a dream, because it felt far too real. Outside, the drumming sounds were still going. He ran out to the roof to see if the sword was actually there or if he was losing his mind. It was still there, but now it was on fire again. The flames were huge. Seyoung rushed to the bathroom and filled a bucket with water. His body felt weak, and he could barely drag the heavy bucket, but he used all his strength to throw the water onto the fire. After struggling for a long time, he finally put the fire out, though he burned his hands and strained his arms in the process. Once the sword looked normal again, he glanced to the side and noticed a hose and a faucet right there. He realized he had worked much harder than he needed to. He could have just used the hose. Exhausted, he went back to his room and slept for a long time. The next day, the sword was burning again. This had been going on for 4 days. This time, he simply used the hose to put out the fire. The situation was becoming a routine. Every time he woke up, the sword was in flames. It felt normal now, but the drum beat still tormented him while he tried to sleep. He couldn't understand why the fire kept coming back, or what kind of sword it was. Finally, he had enough. He wanted peace. He went to the rooftop, sat in a chair, and decided to watch the sword to see exactly when the fire started. The moment a flame appeared, he hit it with the water. It felt like the sword was mocking him, but he refused to give up. He searched for solutions online and decided to try holy water and a cross. He prayed for the sword to leave, convinced it was evil, and splashed it with holy water. Instead of going away, the flames grew even stronger. He kept praying, but nothing changed. By now, Seyoung was miserable. He couldn't sleep, and his days were spent fighting the fire. He decided to end it. He grabbed a toolbox and attacked the sword with a hammer. But when he struck the blade, the hammerhead snapped in half and flew into the wall. He ran back and grabbed a baseball bat, swinging it with all his might. The bat bounced off the sword and hit him right in the face. Furious and desperate, he gripped the hilt of the sword. He decided he was going to pull it out once and for all. As soon as he touched it, the flames flared up with more force than ever before, even though it was daytime. A huge fireball formed at the tip of the sword and slammed into him. Seyoung felt like his body was being torn apart. Thousands of memories of ancient wars flooded his brain. The pain was unbearable, but through the agony, he managed to yank the sword free from the roof. He collapsed on the ground, still clutching the weapon. Downstairs, the women living in the building were complaining about the noise. They were worried and unsettled because the landlord had said no one was allowed on that floor. They wondered if someone was trapped or if something terrible was happening. They had heard screams for days and wanted to call the police, but the building manager told them it wasn't necessary as long as the resident was okay. The neighbors didn't believe him, but the manager promised to call the owner later. Back on the roof, Seyoung slowly woke up. He felt as if he had lived 1,000 lives in a few minutes. When he stood up, he saw the sword lying beside him. He couldn't remember exactly how he had pulled it out, but the hole in the roof had already closed up. He noticed the sword was much larger than it looked before. It was a full meter longer now that it was out of the ground. It was incredibly heavy. When he tried to lift it, he fell over and the sword landed on his chest. Eventually, he managed to lean it against a wall. As he stared at it, a voice echoed in his head. The voice called it a sword of war and a bearer of thunder and storms. It told him that this wasn't its true name, just a name given to it long ago. Seyoung wondered how he suddenly knew these things. More messages filled his mind, telling him to stand firm, never bow down, and always keep the courage to fight. These words inspired him. He gripped the sword correctly, and his mind filled with perfect combat techniques. He tried to copy the movements he saw in his head, but his body couldn't keep up. He tripped and fell again, the heavy sword pinning him down as he let out another scream of pain. Later, back in his room, the woman who looked after him came to visit. He had called her for help because the weight of the sword had actually injured him. She was shocked to hear from him, as he almost never asked for help. Earlier, the nurse had been busy in the middle of a meeting when her phone started ringing. She said she had to take the call. The moment she answered, Seyoung was asking for help, so she apologized to the man she was with and ran off. Now, in Seyoung's room, she explains that she had to ditch a guy just to come see him. She then asks what happened. He stays quiet, but she presses him for answers. She wants to know what he did to tear the ligaments in both of his wrists and even injure his hip. He claims he was exercising, which makes her burst out laughing. He hasn't even walked a few steps in over 2 years, so the idea that he was working out sounds absurd to her. Then, the phone beside them starts ringing again. When she answers, she introduces herself as his nurse. For the first time, we hear her name. She says she is in charge of regular checkups for Tak Seyoung, the protagonist. The caller is the cynical landlord who is already complaining. He says he has been hearing a lot of screaming from the room and asks how Seyoung is doing. Bora replies that he seems fine and looks mentally stable too. She then asks the protagonist to make some noise just so the man can hear that he is really okay. Seyoung makes a sound and says his name. Bora says that should be enough. Once she hangs up, she asks why he is doing this, because several people in the building have been complaining about the noise. The protagonist stays quiet, trying to play it off, but then admits he has been feeling so frustrated that it feels like his body might explode. Yelling was his way of letting it out. At that moment, his nurse remembers all the time she cared for him in the hospital, and her chest tightens a little at the thought. Her attitude softens, and she starts treating him more kindly. She says she will change his bandages regularly and tells him he can remove the cast once he is able to move the joint, but warns him not to push it too often. She adds that it may be hard to visit him frequently, but she will do her best to come by every Tuesday and Thursday. However, she won't be able to make it next week. The protagonist resents this. He feels he doesn't need her and doesn't even want to see her. After she leaves, while he lies on his bed, he sees the sword underneath it. He tries lifting it again and sets it on top of the mattress. His hands still hurt badly and were practically broken. Then, a strange voice starts echoing in his head again, telling him that anyone who never falls never learns how to rise. He is still unnerved by hearing the voice since he is alone in the room, and the voice feels oddly familiar. Those words keep repeating in his mind, telling him to run with the sword and swing it until exhaustion takes him. His head is a mess, wondering what that even means. How is swinging a sword supposed to make him stronger? After doing a quick search online, he finds accounts from people describing their results after practicing with a two-handed sword for 4 months. Once he sees the many movements he is supposed to learn, he knows he has to follow that path. As he stares at his sword, the voice keeps telling him to swing it until he drops from exhaustion. A little later, his nurse visits again. While looking at his hands, she wonders how they are already healing. Something like that should take around 3 weeks, yet he is nearly recovered. She asks if he used some strange medicine to speed it up. The protagonist stays quiet, and she warns him not to overdo it just because he feels better. She tells him he still needs to rest because if anything happens, the blame will fall on her. She leaves looking annoyed, and the protagonist waits for the moment she is gone. After that, he flexes his hands and realizes they feel completely fine. Now, with the sword in hand, those voices in his head keep echoing. The more he hears them, the more motivated he becomes. He starts wondering if the man in his memories is somehow watching him. The command to swing the sword as if his life depended on it keeps pounding in his mind. With the blade in his hands, he heads to the rooftop to try his first movements. It goes badly. The sword is far too heavy, and even lifting it is a challenge. He figures it might be better to rebuild his stamina first. He needs to get outside, run, and build some endurance. At this point, he doesn't care about the neighbors. It has been 2 years since he even set foot on the stairs. In his memory, the former owner of that sword was already running around with it at 12 years old. So for now, all he needs to do is eat and run until he builds up some real endurance. Strapping the sword to his back, he thinks he can at least do some squats. Before all this happened, he could do around 30. With the sword on his back, trusting his body, he figures he can probably manage 10. But when he actually tries, he can't do even 1 and ends up falling face first on the rooftop. In his head, the voice keeps echoing, "Run with the sword, swing it until exhaustion takes you." He heads back to his room and eats a heavy meal. Lying on his bed, he says he feels full. After eating, he waits for the sun to set, so the stairwell will be empty. Then he begins his first real challenge, running up and down the stairs. As soon as he starts descending, he understands that he has to keep going until he is spent and truly can't move anymore. After just 1 flight, his whole body already feels wrecked. To make it worse, he falls with the sword. On the floor, he tells himself he has to keep running no matter what because he needs to get stronger. With slow, painful steps, he keeps going up and down the stairs, pushing his body to the limit. By the time he gets back to the rooftop, he has done 4 round trips and feels like he can't do another. His body is completely spent. But then, the memory of those 8 classmates who did this to him comes rushing back. It lights a fire in his chest, pushing him to do it one more time. After several weeks pass, the trash bags that had been piling up in his room are all stacked outside at once, which is a shocking sight. Lying in bed with the sword resting on his chest, the protagonist feels his stomach growling. He gets up to make food. What is strange is that the more he eats, the hungrier he seems to get. Even while cooking, he stretches his forearm with one hand. Back on the rooftop, he is now doing a full 100 push-ups. For someone who couldn't do even one before, that is massive progress. In his mind, the voice keeps guiding him, saying that the less time he rests between exercises, the stronger he will become, along with his skin and muscles. So, the protagonist gets back up and refuses to stop training, pouring out every drop of sweat. He runs those stairs again, and this time he completes 8 full round trips. With that done, the next step is practicing the sword forms. His goal now is to begin with 100 swings. The voice in his head continues guiding him, telling him to perform each motion as slowly as possible so he can build balance and control over the sword. Then it keeps asking him what the purpose of his life is and what his goal really is. The protagonist believes he has only one goal, and that is revenge. As he lies on his bed, a clear change in his appearance is already visible. He looks sturdier and seems taller. His nurse comes to visit him after sending a surprise message. When he opens the door, he is already waiting for her. She is surprised and asks how he knew she was coming, but he doesn't answer. She checks his blood pressure and asks how he feels. He gives his usual response. Everything hurts a little. The nurse loses her patience and tells him the doctor's report says he is practically healed and ready for a normal life. She suggests he return to school before people start calling him an old man and advises him to make friends so he won't be victimized again. The protagonist steps closer and firmly tells her he will never go back to school. The nurse is shocked and notices how much he has changed. When they first met, he was under 1.60 meters and she was 1.68 meters, but now he is much taller than her. She sees his muscular stomach and is amazed at how fast he has grown and developed. Back on the rooftop, the protagonist continues his intense training. His main goal now is to swing his war sword 10,000 times a day without stopping to receive the sword's blessing and become indomitable. This knowledge comes from mysterious memory fragments that appeared after he touched the sword. Even though he feels he hasn't reached even 10% of his potential, he pushes himself relentlessly. A year passes, and a man named Young is elected as the 21st president of Korea. This is bad news for the protagonist because Young is the father of Soo Jung, one of the girls who ruined his life. During a celebration, the president suggests it is time for the children who were away in the United States to return home. The protagonist hears this news on his computer and knows the election will bring trouble, but he remains committed to his path. The group of 8 people who ruined the protagonist's life begins to reunite. 3 of them, Eugene, Soo-ho, and the white-haired Jun-hyuk, arrive at Incheon International Airport. They are followed by Hee-yun, Chang-soo, and Da-hoon. 2 members, Soo-jung and Soo-hyun, are still in Japan. Jun-hyuk, the white-haired one, has already found out where the protagonist lives. He and the blonde-haired Chung-soo plan to thank the protagonist for the time they spent in detention by attacking him. They even consider breaking into his apartment. Jun-hyuk also mentions that Soo-hoon, who is in Japan, might have joined the Yakuza and would love for them to capture the protagonist as a welcome gift. The group posts a photo on social media, which the protagonist sees. He smiles, waiting for the day they are all together so he can deal with them. In Japan, Soo-jung and Soo-hyun prepare to return to Korea. Their families are powerful and have aligned interests. They are provided with bodyguards for their return. The blonde guy's uncle hires 2 professional men to break into the protagonist's apartment. The men argue as they arrive, confident because their target is just a high school dropout. One man enters the rooftop apartment, noting how abandoned it looks. He finds the door open and enters the darkness. When he doesn't return, his partner goes in after him, only to be dragged into the dark as well. Later, their car is found abandoned and is towed away by workers. The blonde guy and Jun-hyuk grow impatient when they don't hear back from the men. The blonde calls his uncle, who is furious that his professional men have vanished. The uncle decides to send the leader of his organization with a large group of men to the apartment. As the gang members climb the stairs to the rooftop, they hear screams. The leader reaches the top, only to find his men mangled and dead. He sees a huge beast in the doorway, the protagonist, looking more monstrous than ever. The leader is frozen in fear before the protagonist strikes him down. Neighbors report the screams to the police. When the officers arrive, they find the lock broken and the door open. They are stunned by the protagonist's appearance. He is nearly 2 meters tall and looks terrifying. Behind him lies a pile of the mangled men who tried to attack him. The police question him and learn his name is Tak Seyoung. He explains he dropped out of Nunguang High School and that everyone knows why. Because he is still under 18, the police realize they cannot easily arrest him or act against him without causing a media scandal. They decide to clear the scene and leave. After the chaos, the protagonist calls his aunt. He tells her he has decided to go to the United States, which makes her happy. However, he says he isn't going yet. He plans to spend a year traveling and exploring all of Korea first before he leaves. His aunt worries that this will delay his studies, but the protagonist is firm in his decision. He says all he wants is to stay outside for a long time. He wants to feel the wind on his face and thinks it will do his mind some good. He tells his aunt he just wants to relax a little and not to worry if he goes a while without calling. His aunt says she will keep a room open for him, and whenever he wants, he can come to her house. He can do whatever he wants. He just has to call from time to time so she doesn't worry too much. The protagonist says he will, then hangs up. Elsewhere in the city, the white-haired guy and the blonde were still furious about the situation. 2 full days had passed since they sent word to have the protagonist picked up, and not a single message had come back. The white-haired one calls the blonde, asking what happened since he was the one who hired that organization. The blonde says he has been calling them, but no one answers. The white-haired guy snaps, saying he can't even get someone to do a simple job and that it is pathetic incompetence. The blonde gets angry too and tells him not to call for a while. After hanging up, he is still fuming when his phone starts ringing. He answers and hears that Soo-hyun wants to see him. He asks where he needs to go, but he is told that before meeting him, he needs to bring something. When they meet, it turns out the thing Soo-hyun wanted was the apartment photos and the protagonist's location. Soo-hyun asks if he really lives in that rooftop room. He is annoyed there isn't even a proper photo of him. Still, they now plan to get rid of their own documents, so when they put the plan into action, they won't leave any trace. Then he hands everything to Soo-hyun so he can pass it to the special forces. He says that the last time they went after the protagonist, they were far too careless, but this time they will take every possible precaution. The look on his face shows all the rage he still carries from those 2 years in juvenile detention. The blonde seems unusually afraid of him. Apparently, Soo-hyun is the group's leader and intimidates everyone around him. He asks whether the white-haired guy sent that message saying he'd play with the protagonist first, and asks the blonde what that meant. But the blonde says he isn't really sure and knows nothing about it. Soo-hyun asks if he is certain, and he says yes. He had never lied to him. One of the members reports that the protagonist's location has been confirmed and that the special forces will bring him there in about an hour. Soo-hyun smiles. Now he can finally get his revenge on the protagonist for sending him to juvenile detention for 2 years. With everyone gathered, they head out to wait at the protagonist's apartment. Meanwhile, 2 more men are sent there. It looks like he is about to get a couple more toys to play with. When they reach the rooftop, one tells his partner the target is only 18, but they still shouldn't hold back. Once there, they notice the place doesn't look right. His partner stares at the door and suddenly gets scared, saying there is some kind of wild beast inside. The bald guy asks what the hell he is talking about, wondering if he means a rabid dog or something. His partner says, "No, not even close. It's really a wild beast." The bald guy says something like that couldn't possibly live in the middle of the city and that he is talking nonsense. Still, they continue with the mission and move in on the building. Before the bald guy can open the door, the protagonist punches it so hard it flies off its hinges. His partner still tries to hit him and somehow even lands the punch, but it does absolutely nothing. Then the protagonist drives a clenched fist straight into him, flattening him into the floor too. The bald guy was still alive, at least for now. Back with Soo-hyun and the others, he asks one of the guys why he didn't go with the other two. The man says there was no need. Both the bald guy and the big one were pros, and their target was only 18. Then his phone starts ringing. He frowns when he sees the call is from the bald guy they sent out there. The moment he answers, one of his men is screaming. He recognizes the voice right away. It is Kenta, the big guy from the group, yelling through the phone. The protagonist asks where he is, but before Kenta can finish, the call is about to cut off. Realizing he won't get anything useful out of him, the protagonist decides to use the bald guy to lead him to where the others are gathered. The bald man says the place is 10 minutes from his apartment, but the protagonist says he can give 5 at most. With that, he gets into the car. Before that, though, he rips the roof off. He's so huge he can't even fit inside otherwise. Kenta is in the back seat, and they head straight for Soo-hyun's location. The guy on the phone sounds panicked, and the others start asking what happened. He tells them to leave immediately. The mission has apparently failed. If they want to stay safe, they need to go straight home. Soo-hyun can't believe they failed trying to grab a loser like the protagonist. The man snaps that there is no time to explain. They need to get somewhere safe now. He keeps repeating that everyone has to leave that place. Soo-hyun asks if someone is coming, clearly unhappy about it, while the guy on the line sounds furious. But before anyone can do much, someone seems to have entered and a loud scream echoes out. Outside, the protagonist has arrived, sword in hand. People on the street are filming him and taking pictures. He asks the bald man which room they are in, and the answer is the 8th floor. The crowd stares at his size and at the sword, thinking they are watching some kind of movie shoot. But one woman looks into the back seat of the car and spots Kenta. The state he is in sends her into a panic. This isn't a movie at all. It is real. Up in the room, even the thugs are getting nervous. They have no idea what's happening or why all those screams are coming from outside. One of them says the building has 3 stairwells, so they should split up and run. Soo-hyun says he doesn't even know where to go, but no matter where they head, someone could be waiting outside or run into one of them on the stairs. So, splitting up is their best shot. The blonde guy says he wants to go with him, insisting that man can definitely protect them, but Seyoung says one of them should go downstairs and call the police. The girl says she is going with him and clings to his arm. He tells Soo-ho to take the back stairs and tells the blonde guy to use the other stairwell. The hired man decides to go with Soo-ho and the girl since they are the clients and get priority when it comes to protection. In the end, the blonde guy is left on his own while Soo-ho heads off with the others. As they start going down the stairs, the protagonist is already climbing up. The only question is which group he will find first. The blonde guy is coming down the stairs, terrified, while Soo-ho and his group descend until they reach a door and find the police on the other side. They are relieved to see them, thinking they've somehow made it out. The blonde guy isn't that lucky. Without realizing it, he is struck and instantly blacks out. When he opens his eyes, he can't even remember what happened. Then he sees the protagonist standing right in front of him. He wonders who this guy is, and beside him, the bald man, the hired one who gave them the information, is already finished. It is a pretty horrifying sight. The blonde guy immediately panics and stammers out, and the protagonist can start now. He keeps asking who the man is. The protagonist can't believe it. Even after everything he did, this guy still doesn't recognize him because he himself never forgot him. He remembers all too clearly everything that bastard did. Outside, the police are surrounding the building and the whole situation has blown up. From a window, the blonde guy still doesn't realize it, but the protagonist has taken him hostage. One of the officers below wonders who he is and why he is doing this. The protagonist calls the blonde guy by name, Chang-soo. Chang-soo freezes, wondering how he knows his name and who the hell this man is. Then looking him straight in the eye, the protagonist reveals it. He is Tak Seyoung, the same boy Chang-soo tormented and dragged through all that suffering. Desperation spreads across his face. Now he knows exactly who this is, and everything he did comes rushing back. Down below, the police hear the name and immediately order a search on him. Meanwhile, Chang-soo still can't process it. How could this monster possibly be Tak Seyoung? The protagonist says that 3 years ago, in front of Gwangwamun, 2 people, Tak Chang-soon and Go Yoon-jin, gave their lives in the flames. Those 2 were his parents. Everyone below knows that story. The moment they realize it, panic spreads. The man doing all this is that little boy who spent 9 months in a coma after losing his parents in a sacrifice the media turned into a public tragedy. Then he pulls the sword from his back and plants it at his feet. He grabs the blonde by the neck, and the kid immediately starts to panic. He realizes his hands are chained and starts calling for his mother, then his father, which only infuriates the protagonist even more, since he was the one who tore him away from them. He says the boy's parents had already paid with their lives for drawing that kind of attention, but from that day on, he is going to make all of them pay with their lives for everything they put him through. While he says that, everything outside is being broadcast live. The news reports that someone is being held hostage in a building near the station. Both SWAT and the police have already arrived. People wonder if this really is that couple's son. Even though 3 years have passed, he still should have been a minor, but judging by his appearance, he doesn't look like a teenager at all. All around them, things were turning into complete chaos, with every kind of police unit on site. Down below, they ask for the boy's full file and order a deep investigation into everything that happened to him. They also confirm that the blonde kid is the son of the president of Aegis Security, and the officer doesn't like where any of this is heading. Aegis, after all, is the biggest home security company in Korea, and the boy is also one of the defendants tied to that case from 3 years ago. He believes that if the blonde really was involved, and if the man with the sword is truly Tak Seyoung, then that kid is in serious danger. He keeps trying to negotiate with the protagonist, asking what his demands are. But Tak Seyoung makes it clear there will be no negotiation. The officer keeps begging him to say what he wants while helicopters circle above the building. The protagonist repeats that there will be no negotiation. He only has an announcement to make. Then he starts naming every person involved, the 8 people who did this to him. One by one, he lists them, including Kim Chansgu, who is right beside him. He declares that all of them will die by his own hands. Their parents will die too, along with the rest of their families, brothers and sisters included. Every last one of them will fall by the protagonist's hand. And that was the announcement he made to the entire world. He says that even if they call the police or the army, nothing will stop him from doing what he wants, and they will pay for everything they did to him. No one will be able to stop him. The blonde makes one last attempt, which honestly is incredibly stupid. He says something terrible will happen to the protagonist if he kills him because his father is a very important man. But gripping that sword, the protagonist is so furious, he almost seems to be asking whether the kid still thinks he is that same idiot from school, still a coward, no matter how big he has gotten. The only thing written across the protagonist's face is rage. Looking straight into the cameras, he tells everyone to watch closely. This is nothing less than a declaration of war. Then with his sword, he sends the kid's head flying. That scene left everyone silent and stunned. Chang-soo's father was watching the whole thing on his tablet. At that moment, he was consumed by rage, repeating over and over, "How dare he do that to his son?" From his face alone, you could tell the man was deeply shaken. The chairman, who was also Soo-hoon's father, was watching too, and even he looked stunned. He picks up the phone and immediately asks to be connected to the police commissioner. The man who answers is Lee Sung-bak, and the chairman tells him that they must immediately give the order to shoot the protagonist. Back at the building, the officer below is still trying to process what just happened. Then his phone rings, and when he checks it, he sees that authorization to fire has been granted. They are to do it now. One sniper is already in position with more stationed on the other side. Once everyone is ready, the protagonist watches it all, carefully tracking them with his eyes. Then one of them pulls the trigger, certain he has just hit the protagonist in the head. He immediately reports that the target has been eliminated, but when he looks closer, he realizes the shot struck the sword instead. The protagonist reflected it. Down below, the officer gets new orders. They are to fire for real. So he passes the command to everyone, and a storm of gunfire erupts. But the protagonist is no longer on the building. With a huge leap, he jumps far away. As they follow his movement, he slides down using a pole, skimming across the tops of cars, then lands on the ground with ease. Spotting a nearby police car, he hurls it back at them, causing a massive explosion. The officer is still trying to understand what just happened, but when he looks into the flames, the protagonist emerges from inside, and he clearly isn't there to talk. The officer wonders what that thing even is because it doesn't seem human at all. The officer orders his men to prepare for combat and grants them clearance to fire. Before anyone can shoot, Tak Seyoung leaps into the air and vanishes from sight. Moving at blinding speed, he suddenly materializes behind the shooters and takes them both down. The officer continues barking orders, screaming at his men to use every weapon they have. One sniper manages to get a clear view and fires a shot, but Seyoung easily deflects the bullet with his sword before it can hit his face. As the officer yells for them to stop him by any means necessary, the entire squad opens fire at once. Seyoung seems to reflect every single shot. He then swings his sword, releasing a powerful blast that carves open a massive path and wipes out everyone in front of him. On-site reporters watch in utter disbelief, unable to comprehend what they are witnessing. After clearing the way, the protagonist lets out a deafening scream. Meanwhile, watching the broadcast from a hospital, Choi Si-ryun and Gu Jung-min look absolutely terrified. The girl panics completely while Si-ryun trembles, the protagonist's words echoing painfully in his head. Ultimately, Seyoung escapes the scene. A massive fire breaks out where the confrontation occurred, and emergency teams call in hostages. While the injured receive treatment, the officer in charge interrogates a man named Gu Yong. Gu Yong admits that Seyoung questioned him earlier about the location of the hostages. Because those hostages, Choi Si-ryun and Gu Jung-min, had been taken to the hospital, Gu Yong gave up their location simply because he did not want to die. Hearing this, the furious officer punches Gu Yong straight in the face, realizing this mistake puts lives in danger and throws the situation out of control. Seyoung is already heading toward Yonjin Hospital, the exact location where Si-ryun and Gu Jung-min are hiding. The officer quickly grabs his phone to warn his men, ordering all special forces to deploy to the hospital immediately. At the hospital, Si-ryun and Gu Jung-min remain paralyzed with fear while Seyoung arrives outside. A television reporter confirms that the suspect has escaped the previous scene and killed Sang-soo, leaving his current whereabouts unknown. Hearing this, Choi Si-ryun becomes overwhelmed with rage. Suddenly, the woman tied to the Secret Service enters the room with several men to evacuate them. They lift the terrified girl into their arms and prepare to flee, but Seyoung is already waiting for them as he steps inside the hospital. As the officer frantically tries to redirect special forces, the Secret Service learns that Seyoung is coming straight for them. Before they can react, Seyoung shatters the glass and emerges through the smoke, standing face to face with Si-ryun for the first time in years. The woman quickly drags Si-ryun away, telling him to run for the elevator. Seyoung screams Si-ryun's name, asking where he thinks he is going after what their families did to his parents. The woman orders everyone to attack and hold him off, but the guards stand no chance, and Seyoung beats them down without slowing. Si-ryun and 3 others make it to the elevator and desperately slam the buttons to get it moving. Before the doors close, one badly beaten guard reaches out and begs for help, only to be violently yanked away in the blink of an eye. Through the closing gap, the group catches a glimpse of Seyoung and wonders if he is even human. Si-ryun realizes with dread that the elevator is heading down instead of up to the roof, where a rescue helicopter awaits. Suddenly, they sense something incredibly heavy moving above them. Looking up, they see Seyoung with his sword, prompting someone to order everyone to duck. Seyoung drives his sword through the ceiling with one hand. The woman tells the group to run without looking back the moment the doors open. Seyoung stabs through the ceiling repeatedly, and though the main group avoids the blade, the man carrying the girl is left behind. He manages to throw her body aside safely just as Seyoung tears through the roof and drops straight into the elevator. A massive cloud of smoke fills the cabin as everyone struggles back to their feet, facing Tak Seyoung as he demands to know where they think they are going. He calls out to Si-ryun and Gu Jung-min, his face showing years of built-up animosity, but a car suddenly barrels into the area at full speed. Even with his overpowered reflexes, Seyoung fails to notice it in time and gets hit. The impact sends his body flying, though he remains uninjured. Inside the car is Professor Yong, who shouts for everyone to get in immediately. Seyoung uses his sword to absorb the residual impact and stands right back up. The woman and the others pile into the vehicle, and the professor urges them to drive away without him. Though his friend begs him to escape together, the professor insists they leave, and the car speeds off. Left face to face with Seyoung, Professor Yong ignores him and starts walking after the car. The professor fires at him repeatedly, but the bullets have no effect. He wonders what kind of monster he is dealing with, but notes that if Seyoung wants the car, he will have to go through him first. Seyoung easily wipes him out in milliseconds. Meanwhile, the survivors flee down the road, escorted by several security vehicles. They frantically look around for any sign of the attacker. A voice on the phone warns the woman that Seyoung is less than a minute away and that they must reach a bridge where a helicopter is waiting. She relays the message to her driver, telling him to floor it. Despite their speed, Seyoung catches up and lands on top of one of the escort cars with a massive leap. Realizing he is on top of them as they approach the rendezvous point, the woman orders her men to use any means possible to stop him. A guard pulls out a crate of heavy weapons, including grenade launchers, and fires with a smile, confident that no normal person can survive such an explosion. To his shock, Seyoung leaps through the blast and lands right onto the hood of their car. Gu Jung-min screams in terror as Seyoung rips the roof off the vehicle with his bare hands. It looks like the end of the line, but the car suddenly slams into the side of the bridge, and Seyoung uses his sword to cushion his own impact. Behind him, several men armed with rocket launchers take up positions and fire multiple projectiles. A huge cloud of smoke explodes around Seyoung, prompting more men to prepare a follow-up barrage. However, Seyoung bursts out of the smoke, leaping up to hang from the roof of the bridge. He easily dodges and deflects the incoming police gunfire, rendering their efforts useless, before dropping back down to the ground. He warns the officers that if they value their lives, they should leave immediately, because anyone who stays in his way will die by his hand. The police ignore the warning and keep shooting. Behind them, the evacuation helicopter arrives, and Seryun and Gu Jung-min rush toward it. Seyoung watches them flee, aiming his sword directly at the aircraft. He knows that if he strikes it now, everyone on board will die instantly. But he decides they do not deserve such a quick escape because they would barely suffer. Instead, he chooses to wait, wanting despair to sink deep into their minds until the day they inevitably meet again. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, several powerful figures gather around a giant screen with the president to watch the chaos unfolding across the city. An official identifies the suspect as 18-year-old Tak Seyoung, last seen at Yongdong Bridge. She explains that 3 years prior, he was a victim in a juvenile incident that drew massive media attention, and his parents later sacrificed themselves in front of Gwanghwamun. One official wonders where Seyoung is heading next, but the investigator admits she does not know yet. She notes that the president is skipping the meeting to seek alternative solutions. At Blue Wing Studio, another group of influential figures watches the broadcast, including the part where Seyoung names them all and vows to eliminate their entire families. This group includes the chairman of the Shinshin group, who is also Choi Seryun's father. He insists they must block the video and all related internet searches to stabilize the situation. The white-haired boy's mother, who is the president of Blue Wing Studio, warns that suppressing the footage will be difficult. The green-haired girl's father, the chairman of the country's largest news portal, Goldfield, is also present alongside Namji's father. All of these men are powerful parents of the 8 individuals involved in the original incident. One parent asks how they are supposed to deal with someone who does not even flinch in front of guns. Another argues that if Seyoung were truly bulletproof, he would not bother dodging, concluding that the failure lies in police incompetence. He suggests that concentrated firepower from military forces or elite mercenaries will definitely kill him. The room falls completely silent because no one knows if that strategy will actually work against someone who appears beyond human. The chairman declares he can hire any kind of specialized personnel required, while the white-haired boy's mother wonders aloud who Seyoung will target first. Seyoung heads to Gongmu Cemetery, causing the worker on duty to panic and tell his co-worker to call the police immediately. Ignoring them, Seyoung walks up to his parents' grave. He breaks down in tears and apologizes to them, saying he should have come to visit them first before leaving home, and expresses how terribly he misses them. Placing his hand on the gravestone, he tells them not to worry, urging them to just rest and watch because he knows exactly what he needs to do.